Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Enneagram for Black Liberation, Return to Who You Are Beneath the Armor You Carry, by Chichi Agorom, narrated by Chichi Agorom. Publisher's note: this audiobook will refer to visual elements included in the print and ebook editions of the book. Additionally, this audiobook includes many references to exercises. Please have a piece of paper with a pen or pencil or a note-taking device available. To my youngest self, the one who always knew she was enough, deserving of love without effort, divine. Thank you for showing me the way back home. Introduction. I am, in addition to many other things, an Enneagram teacher and practitioner because I believe in the power of this tool to help us move toward our more integrated selves. I distinctly remember when I realized that, while I had utilized my type for so many years to navigate the world, I was more than just this type structure that had held me up. This realization gave me so much freedom to explore the fullness of who I am outside of my type. There are many ways to work with the Enneagram. It can serve as an aid in self-discovery, relational health, organizational development, and so much more. For me, the most profound way that working with the Enneagram has helped my personal growth is as a tool to rediscover who I am, separate from who I always believed I needed to be in order to be loved. From my own personal work and from my experience working with many others, I know the Enneagram can help free us from our limiting stories of who we think we must be to be okay, and offer us a path to wholeness and freedom. I wrote this book to offer that invitation to you. In the time I spent training to become an Enneagram teacher and practitioner, I was often the only Black person in the room. The content of the trainings was deep, complex, and nuanced, but to me, it very often seemed privileged. It required a certain level of protection gained from privilege and power to be able to do the work of integration without facing any harm. I started to wonder how these conversations about the Enneagram would shift if the experiences of those who hold marginalized identities were centered. Naming issues around structures of power, systems of oppression, and access to privilege and power within those systems made it clear to me that Enneagram work is not the same for everyone. When I centered myself in all of my particularities, Black, woman, immigrant, I was able to use the Enneagram in a way that helped me find more freedom. That is why this book centers Black women in our exploration of the Enneagram as a tool for liberation. I believe wholeheartedly that when Black women are free, we will all be free. My hope, as an Enneagram teacher, is to create more space for Black and brown bodies within Enneagram learning communities. I hope to teach in a way that honors and centers our lived experiences and acknowledges that different work is required of centered folks than of those whose identities are marginalized. And I want to center our healing, rest, and liberation in a world that demands that we continue to labor and suffer for the advancement of others, but never ourselves. However, even though I intentionally center Black women, this book is for everyone. Liberation is everyone's work, not just the work of those who are harmed by systems of oppression. If your lived experience is different, if your identities are centered, or you have more access to power and privilege, I invite you to engage this book with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to investigate what role your own type's armor has played in upholding harmful systems and harmful narratives within yourself. I believe it is important to know who your teacher's teachers are because it helps ground our study and practice in lineage. Knowing who you're learning from and who that person learned from offers not only a sense of greater connection, but also a system of accountability. Thousands of Enneagram teachers and coaches exist out there today. In fact, almost anyone can read a couple of books on the Enneagram and begin typing people based on that cursory knowledge. But cursory knowledge severed from its lineage and context can be used in harmful ways, whether intentional or not. We risk using the tool in a misguided way at best, or using it to perpetuate harm at worst. For example, using the Enneagram as a way to place people in boxes that restrict the fullness of who they are based on certain characteristics is a misuse of the system and can be harmful. I studied under the teachers at the Narrative Enneagram, TNE, one of two of the original Enneagram schools in the United States. TNE has been around since 1988, founded by Helen Palmer and David Daniels. Helen Palmer was a student of Claudio Naranjo, who was a student of Oscar Ichazo, who was influenced by the teachings of George Gurdjieff, who was a student of many spiritual traditions across cultures. This is the lineage from which I learned about the Enneagram. I use the model of the narrative tradition in my work with the Enneagram and in my approach to this book. Because there is more than one school of thought around the Enneagram, I think you'll find it helpful to understand the basic framework of the narrative tradition and how it guides our exploration of the Enneagram. TNE teaches the Enneagram through the three branches of psychology, spirituality, and somatics. An integrated life requires balance between awareness, receptivity, and somatics. Through psychology, we begin to name and understand our patterns. Spirituality offers us an invitation to open ourselves up to the possibilities that exist outside of the singular story by which we have lived. And somatic work invites us to be present in our bodies so that we can interrupt these patterns that live in our cells and neural pathways. Somatic work is incredibly important to working with the Enneagram because our habits and patterns do not simply exist as thoughts. Our bodies enact patterns of behavior that, carried out over time, become unconscious. By unconscious, I mean that we don't even have to think about doing things a certain way or reacting a certain way. Our bodies simply repeat the pattern for us. So while it is important to be able to cognitively understand the elements of your type structure, for meaningful transformation, you need to work with your body as well. Another very important element of the narrative tradition is storytelling, which is one of the gifts that learning through panels gives us. We know that our brains are wired to create stories as a way to make sense of life and our experiences. We also tend to better connect with and gain a deeper understanding of a concept when we hear it in story form. The same is true for our understanding of type structure and the many ways it plays out. Sharing stories helps us to see the varied ways one type structure can show up in different people's bodies based on their life experiences, families of origin, cultures, and other factors. In keeping with this tradition, stories will be scattered throughout the book, told by Black people who identify with the different types. Some of these stories were shared in a group conversation via Zoom with both old and new friends. Witnessing each person share about the different armor they carry around all the time was a balm in itself. Some of the other stories were sent to me either through voice memos or in written format. I am humbled that these 9 people were willing to be vulnerable in sharing about their armor to help illustrate how these themes show up in a real person's life. One story is highlighted per type, and you will find them in boxes throughout the type chapters. While you might not resonate fully with each person's depiction of how the type shows up for them, I hope that as you hear their stories, you are able to see some reflections of yourself that help you feel less alone and more known. For centuries, the Enneagram was handed down by word of mouth in sacred circles, and the narrative tradition seeks to continue that legacy through the way we teach the Enneagram. Teaching is done with the aid of panels, where people share their own lived experiences of type structure and work with whatever comes up in the moment. The idea here is that there isn't one expert in the room who holds all the wisdom. Instead, we bring our collective wisdom to the table and learn from the wisdom that resides in each of our bodies. I often tell Enneagram clients that while I have spent years learning about the system of the Enneagram, I will never know more than they do about their own lived experience of using that type structure to navigate the world. I love the freedom that provides for people to bring their own wisdom to the table. I love the freedom it gives me to be a participant, not an expert, and to trust that there is a collective wisdom that guides us all. I offer you that same invitation to bring your own wisdom to the table as you listen to this book. While I have written a book that you have chosen to listen to, I am not an expert on your lived experience of being the type you identify with. I offer my wisdom, both inherited and inherent, in this book. But for you to get the most out of it, you'll need to bring your own context and lived experience, observe yourself, and listen to your body's wisdom. As we learn to become better observers of ourselves, we create more space within, which allows us to experience freedom. Part 1. Chapter 1. Why This Matters. Black women deserve to be free. In the foyer of her mother's church, a dark-skinned, beautiful little girl was surrounded by a small crowd of adults who were all laughing, amused by her 3-year-old antics. She was delighted by the attention. It felt natural to be at the center of so much love and joy without effort. One of the adults, a very tall man, picked her up and tossed her into the air multiple times, a little higher each time. She squealed loudly with each toss and would throw her head back to see just how close to the ceiling she was. Every time his hands left her little body for a few seconds, it felt like she was flying. Beneath her was the crowd of adults who wouldn't let her fall, a circle of smiling faces cheering her on and sharing in her joy. She felt like she could do this forever. Her loud squeals eventually brought out her mother, who was curious to see why her daughter was laughing so hard. Her mother's worry shut down the action quickly. She demanded that no one toss her daughter that high up in the air again. The little girl was immediately returned to the ground and picked up by her mother, who hurriedly made her way to the car. That little girl was me. This is my earliest memory, fuzzy around the edges, but one that makes me smile with all my teeth whenever I remember it. For many years, I forgot about this version of myself. I still forget her sometimes. When asked about my childhood, the parts that immediately come to mind are the experiences of loneliness, of trauma, of carrying more knowledge of the world's horrors than I should have known at such a tender age. My mother describes it like an on-off switch. One day I was full of joy and laughter, and the next I had withdrawn into myself, quiet and terrified of the world. Those difficult experiences shaped me. They formed the way I showed up in friendships, relationships, and even my own family. I grew up too fast, and internally, I mourned the loss of a normal childhood where I could just be a little girl with no cares in the world. Externally, adults praised me for being so mature for my age. I wasn't a child who showed her anger on the surface, but I felt red-hot rage every time an adult congratulated me for wearing my pain well, instead of offering to help remove the heavy burden that wasn't mine to carry in the first place. I would come home and complain to my mother about how much I hated being called mature, and she would laugh, perplexed by why I was so offended by a compliment. I didn't have the language then to explain to her why it hurt so much. Even as an adult, I still feel a less intense version of that rage when I am praised for being so strong and brave. In my head, I am often yelling at the person complimenting me, "I don't want to be strong. I don't want to be wise beyond my years. I want the freedom to be soft without fear." But being seen as mature or wise had its gifts too. It gave me a role to play in relationships that offered something of value. I could offer the wisdom from the lessons I had learned while keeping my own vulnerability around the pain safely tucked away inside of me. Being seen as brave or strong meant I got a level of respect not offered to those who were perceived as fragile or weak. I had been criticized so often as a child for being too sensitive, so being praised as strong felt like I had successfully fooled everyone into seeing only the parts of me I allowed them to see. No one needed to know how much everything actually affected me, how badly I wanted to feel loved without effort. The risk of pain was too great after all I had experienced, So I used what came naturally to me to try and earn love. Maybe if I was the bravest, wisest, most mature person in a room, I would be worthy again of the attention, love, and joy that my 3-year-old self received without effort. I learned how to be vulnerable with people without really letting them see me. A part of me was always withdrawn as a mechanism of protection. You can only hurt the parts of me I give you, and if I never give you all of me, some part of me will remain safe from pain. From my withdrawn vantage point, I would observe people and their behavior. Because my family generally didn't speak much around their experiences of pain, I learned to observe patterns, looking for what people weren't saying underneath the many or few words they chose. I wanted to understand why people acted the way they did, because it might help me understand why I had ended up the recipient of so much pain. Maybe it would help me understand what to do with the hurt, since it was unacceptable in my Nigerian culture to speak of your pain. Why did other people seem happier than me and my family members? Were they really happy? Or was everyone carrying unspoken hurt around with them all the time, too? If so, how would we all heal? Did we have to carry around the heavy backpacks filled with pain and suffering and trauma forever? These questions led me to a master's program in clinical mental health counseling at the age of 24. I finally had the time and resources to live in the space of these questions and gain a better understanding of what motivates our behaviors, how our attachments shape us, how we become resilient, and how we heal. It was during my master's program that I was first introduced to the Enneagram. At the time, I was a bit skeptical of the idea that all of human experience could be divided into 9 types. Additionally, the person who introduced the Enneagram to me wasn't someone whose suggestions I deemed trustworthy, so I tossed it out and forgot about it. But over the next couple of years, and through the end of my graduate degree, the Enneagram kept popping up everywhere for me. More and more people I respected were talking about it, and I was beginning to get curious about a system that seemed more dynamic and nuanced than other personality tests I had used up until that point. The system of the Enneagram invited me to, for the first time, see how much of my energy went into creating an image that was separate from my truest self, what the Enneagram calls the essential self. Without shame, I was given language for the patterns I had noticed over the years, patterns I had come to think of as just who I am. I began to see how I had wielded the particular behaviors that gained me applause and acceptance into a kind of armor to keep myself safe from pain. The more I understood about my type as armor, the freer I felt to choose when to pick up and put down the armor without confusing it with my true identity. The kindest gift the Enneagram has given me is a deepened compassion for myself and for others. Its invitation to notice my patterns without judgment and to allow myself to be exactly where I am was transformative for me. I had grown up with the belief that I needed to become a perfect future version of myself in order to be worthy of love. And the Enneagram taught me how to compassionately question that compelling yet untrue story about my lovability. I always felt like an anomaly within my family, my Nigerian culture, and the white American culture I was thrust into at the age of 17. So to discover a system that read me so perfectly felt like a relief. It wasn't just me, after all. As I continued to work with it, I found the permission to be present with my goodness, worthiness, and lovability in each moment. I embrace my humanity more now than I did before I began working with this transformative system. Once I completed my master's program, I began my training with the narrative Enneagram to become a certified teacher and practitioner. The first return of that memory of 3-year-old me being thrown in the air happened during a visualization exercise at an Enneagram training. My 3-year-old self came back to me as an invitation, a reminder of what was true before the pain of the world clouded my ability to see it. All of my life so far has been a journey to return to the freedom and joy of that little girl who knew she was deserving of love without effort. Those things I believed I had to be to survive are things that are actually true of me. I am brave. I am wise. I am strong. But what I have learned and continue to learn is that my bravery and wisdom aren't what earn me love, belonging, or safety. The danger lies in confusing my strengths with my worthiness. When I do that, I abandon the other parts of myself that I'm convinced make me less worthy. In reality, I am worthy of love when I'm doing absolutely nothing, when I am at rest, when I allow myself to be soft, when I am vulnerable, when I make mistakes or I'm anxious, angry, or sad. The more space I create between my essential self and the things I learned to do to survive, the closer I feel to 3-year-old me. Her freedom and joy don't feel naive. After all, the world was still inequitable and unjust while she soared in the air, protected by the circle of love beneath her. Her embodied freedom wasn't grounded in the existence of a perfect world. My 3-year-old self, a depiction of my truest self, reminds me that it is possible to embody freedom as a dark-skinned, Black immigrant woman while so much pain still exists in an imperfect world. Because of the way our world is set up, this sounds like a revolutionary concept. Blackness, whether on the continent of Africa or in the diaspora, is often associated with possessing superhuman strength, toughness, and a constant striving to prove we are not who the systems of supremacy tell us we are. Even when we attain success as defined by the systems of supremacy, material wealth, career, recognition, fame, etc., we still can't shake the feelings of not enoughness. We use protective armor, humor, hardness, or even lighter skin to get further up the ladder of supremacy rather than in the pursuit of freedom. On the other hand, sometimes even our work to dismantle systems of oppression can become the altar on which we place our worthiness, believing we are more worthy because we're fighting against oppression. Our activism can become another armor we carry that doesn't lend itself to our true freedom and rest. But there is a difference between fighting to prove we are worthy and fighting to create a new world because we know we are worthy of it. When our fight is grounded in a belief in our inherent worth and dignity, we don't have to carry the fight with us everywhere like armor. We are not here to just fight and suffer until we die. We get to choose rest, ease, and joy for ourselves. We deserve that, even while the world is still a raging dumpster fire. We deserve that even while we work toward uprooting the lies of supremacy within us and around us. We deserve that simply because joy is our birthright. Rest is our birthright. This book explores the Enneagram as armor that we wield to protect ourselves from pain and offers practices to help create more space between what we do to survive and who we are. This book is also a love letter to Black women in particular. Zora Neale Hurston wrote way back in 1937 that the Black woman is the mule of the world, and those words still ring true in 2021. Black women are often at the forefront of liberatory movements because if we don't fight for ourselves, no one else will. And in the fight for our own liberation, we end up fighting for everyone else's, even when they don't show up for us. We are dismissed as angry when we demand for people to do better. We are glorified for how well we suffer and applauded by the people who benefit daily from the systems that cause our suffering. We internalize the messages of those systems and punish ourselves for being too much and not enough at the same time. It is exhausting. We most certainly need armor to protect ourselves from the cruelty of this world, but we cannot forget that our armor is only a one-sided story of who we are. We need spaces, both internal and external, where we can exist without the armor. So, dear Black woman, I hope this book helps you create more space within yourself to embrace all of your complexities, your tenderness and your fire, your hope and your grief, your loudness and your softness, your strengths and your insecurities. You get to be fully human, fully worthy, fully free outside of the white gaze. Each time we come home to our identity beyond survival, it is a taste of freedom. May the taste of freedom linger on our tongues, reminding us what it is we are actually fighting for. A collective approach to wholeness work. A popular quote, which is frequently cited as an African proverb, says, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together." Here in the United States, we live in a go fast alone society. And even though I grew up in a collectivist culture that emphasized the go together lifestyle, my natural tendency is to go fast alone. I'd much rather do something myself than try to figure out the expectations of a whole group of people. The me-centric individualism that is prevalent in the United States makes it easy to believe that an individual's wellness, or lack thereof, is made possible strictly by each person's independent effort. The pick yourself up by the bootstraps mentality is a perfect example of this way of thinking, placing both glory and shame on the individual for what they achieve or fail to achieve, while ignoring the systems set up for the benefit of only a few. What we know to be true, however, is that our wellness and liberation do not exist separate from the collective. It is important to be clear, though, about what the word wellness means here. Wellness is a state of balance that comes from having our personal, relational, and collective needs met. Because wellness includes the personal, relational, and collective, there can be no wellness without justice. If the systems that govern our communities are structured in a way that ignores or even exacerbates our needs, we cannot be truly well. Those who have the power to protect themselves from systemic harm tend to define wellness simply as love and light, or choosing positivity and transcending pain. But how can those who are consistently harmed by these systems ever be well by that definition? Wellness work is not just the navel-gazing, self-care trend of long baths, face masks, and yoga studio memberships that's been popularized by social media. This insular focus excludes the fact that wellness is our collective responsibility. Wellness and justice work must go hand in hand if we are truly to create a more equitable world. In my postmaster's marriage and family therapy program, we talked often about what wellness and healing look like for individuals in the context of the systems in which they exist. For example, someone might come to therapy seeking support for their experience of anxiety. Looking through a purely individualistic lens, the focus of therapy would be to teach the client techniques to soothe or overcome their anxiety. The client might be encouraged to move their body or practice mindful breathing or make lists that help them focus only on what they can control. If we looked at this same client through a systemic lens, we would become more curious about their identities and how those identities have impacted their history and current lived experience. What is their family system like? Do they feel supported and safe in their everyday life? Are they financially stable? Do they hold a marginalized identity? And if so, how have they experienced harm as a result? Do they have relationships in which they can fully be themselves without fear of harm or retribution? Let's say the client mentioned earlier is experiencing anxiety because they are highly qualified but keep being rejected from jobs due to the color of their skin. This leaves them vulnerable to the threat of eviction in the near future. Maybe they also take care of their aging parents financially, and without a steady, well-paying job, their family members will suffer too. While a reminder to move their body and deepen their breath is helpful, it doesn't address the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?